last groups that we had, a woman, complex grief, February, quite a lot of mud, quite a lot of rain sort of going on. And she went to the horse to go and connect with it, and she slipped and she fell in probably the biggest puddle in the whole space. And she just started laughing. And this was the first time she laughed in probably a decade, because she just felt, what else can I do? This is my rock bottom. I'm here in horse shit. I am on my back. I'm in the mud. It's raining. It's cold. This is really my rock bottom. And, and then people started helping her up, and she went to the horse and she hugged the horse and she cried and cried and cried and cried. And something shifted. Last week, a horse would, someone who's quite scared of horses, didn't want to go near them, and just went and put its head right on this person's chest. And I'm thinking, gosh, I've never seen you do that. You've never done that. I can tell you what doesn't make a good therapist. I mean, someone who wants to help other people is not a good therapist. That's a person who needs a lot of therapy. You don't. If you want to help, if you want to rescue, you need to understand what drives you to kind of help and rescue, because you're going to be doing it for you rather than for the people you're working with. So
1, 2, 3, 4.
So today's episode, it's about horses and horse therapies. Bear with me for a little longer introduction. 8 years ago, a friend of mine, Adrian, a psychologist, tells me, hey, David, you like horses, you play polo, I like these things of self-growth. You should really do a horse constellation. I was like, sure, let me try it. I was curious. So I scheduled a session, and the following Saturday, I am on my motorbike on the way to the mountains outside of Mexico City at 7 a.m. I get there, and there is a lady and 3 horses. And she asks me, so what you want to go over? And I have no idea what I'm doing here. She's like, don't worry, the horses will tell us. And I'm like, okay, she's crazier than I am. And then 5 minutes into it, she's just starts giving me exercises, and she goes over my relationships, my family, my work situation. And I was blown away. I thought there was a trick, but the things she told me were just really on spot. So I decided to do a couple of sessions more, 4 or 5 sessions. And after that, my life was really impacted. I could see patterns of behavior that I hadn't understood I had before, and started changing. And this was fantastic, and the impact was amazing. So I decided to study it. I studied it for the next year and a half, 2 years. I did over 100 sessions guided with Lorenza, my teacher. And after which I've started giving sessions both for companies, executives, people in general, doing all types of therapies, from couples therapies, situations regarding health, regarding trauma. And the results and impact on people have been massive. So while it was kind of a hobby or passion at the beginning, people started coming to me and asked me for more sessions. And this has developed into something called Leads Horses, which we are like really focusing on developing a strong project. The only thing now, after 700 sessions, it's like, it's been hard to find like research on it and more practitioners. And I came across this fantastic person, Professor Andreas Liefooghe. And Andreas is one of the top experts. He has a lot of experience. I'm going to tell you a little bit of his resume. And he was kind to do the podcast with us. And the truth is, horse therapy is more and more being accepted and used both by individuals and companies. Companies like Amazon, Walmart, Accenture, L'Oreal, Microsoft are already using it. So I decided to interview Andreas, and we have an amazing conversation. Andreas is a chartered psychologist with the British Psychological Society, a member of the Division of Occupational Psychology, and a practitioner psychologist with the Healthcare and Professional Council, a member of the British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy, and an academic fellow of the Chartered Institutes of Personal Development. He's also the founder of Centaur Operation, and you can look more information on their website on retreats and courses. They have amazing retreats. They have one in Nihi in Indonesia now, and they are doing more all over the world next year. So I definitely recommend you check it. And he also leadshorses.com, LITSHORSES, for our website, and you can see our sessions and courses all over the world. So now I hope you enjoy my conversation with Andreas. So, Andreas, thank you so much for being with us today here at Lead Sex. I've been following you for a while now. Your work in Indonesia, at Nihi, and also like I've read your book. As I've told you before, I've been working with horses, and I've been around horses for a long time as well, with horse constellations. And your book has actually been like an amazing framework. I will put on the show notes the link to it, and I've recommended it to several people because it actually, in my opinion, brings to horse therapies a whole different framework. I know you don't like frameworks, and you say that frameworks make the practitioner lazy, and I fully agree with that. But it definitely helped me structure a lot of ideas that I had been learning in practice. So tell me about your work with horses. What is it? Because I see a lot of people confusing things. They think about horse therapy and they go into, oh, that's equine therapy. And like there are all these different aspects and they think it's physical. So what's your work with horses?
Thank you, David. So people understand art therapy, right? Or music therapy, or movement therapy, or dance therapy. So people know that there are many, many different ways that we can kind of do therapy, or help people to understand themselves and the way they behave in the world, the way they make decisions in the world, without just talking and without just sort of language. So to me, that's one of the ways that horses come into it. So horses, in the first instance, I would say, are a tool. They are a technique. They are a way to kind of get people to understand themselves, other people, and they do that through interacting with the horse. So all the work we do is on the ground. There's no riding involved. There's absolutely no horsemanship involved at all. So I know there's other places that, for example, kind of teach people how to lead a horse or any of those kind of things, and that's fine. But that's not how we work. How we work is really giving people an opportunity to look at minute details of how they actually develop relationships. And if you develop a relationship with a person, it's really, really hard to kind of figure out what that actually looks like, because that person is the same as you. Horses are radically different. And because they're radically different, you actually kind of get a huge amount of information, a huge amount of feedback about yourself. So that's the baseline on how I see the use of horses. In a slightly different way, the therapy is sort of decenters the therapist. So the horse takes the place of the therapist, and it's really about what is this relationship about, and how can we figure out what's going on for you in that process.
What can people achieve with it? Like, give me examples of some results, because I've seen also then we'll go a little bit more into Operation Centaur, but I've seen like you do all these types of programs from grief to you work with prisoners, you work all over the world with companies as well. What you see are like the key results that people can get from working with you.
Okay, so we get people to come to us when they're stuck. I think that's the key thing. That's kind of organized. Sort of everybody who comes is stuck. Whether that's a company that's stuck because they're always recruiting the same people, or whether it's a person who's stuck because they've got complex grief and they can't let go of a certain part of the process, or people have done a lot of therapy already. Usually, people come to us when they feel very, very stuck. And in my opinion, horses are all about movement. It's all about moving things from a place that's very static to a place that's much more dynamic. Because most people, when they go into a therapy session, they sit in front of their therapist or their psychologist or their psychiatrist, and then they make eye contact and they look at each other. And usually it's quite a small sort of consulting room. And then you have to start talking about those innermost things that kind of are going on for you. So to me, that's not particularly conducive. People are already stuck, and then we stick them in this tiny little space and we look at them, and then we ask them to kind of talk about things. The things that we ask people to talk about are traumatizing. They're kind of quite difficult things to talk about. Otherwise, people would have talked about them a long time, and they would have processed it, and it would have been cathartic. People have a huge amount of shame about the things that they want to kind of bring in therapy, a huge amount of time, and that's what stops them from actually talking about what goes on for them. So with horses, it is very, very different, because I don't need to know the whole story. You're coming to me because you're dealing with some issue. I don't really need to know what that issue really is all about. I'm going to send you out to the horse, and I'm going to get you to do something that's very dynamic, that's moving things along. And then I'm going to ask you how you feel about that. That's really the way I think, that's how the sort of, the real power of horse and equine assisted psychotherapy works. It does not rely on language. If I expand a little bit on that, if I want to share with you what is going on inside of me right now, the only way I can do that is by putting it into words. Many people who come and see us can't do that. They can't put things into words, either because they don't have access to that part of themselves yet, they don't have a word for how they feel, or they're too ashamed or too embarrassed to kind of start talking about it. So we send them off straight away to kind of go and communicate with horses. Horses don't speak English, they don't speak Spanish, they don't speak Portuguese, they don't speak German, but they're perfect
Thank
communicators.
you.
Again?
Thank God.
Yeah. But they are incredible communicators. If anyone who's been around horses and watching horses, you can see a huge amount of movement going on between horses. Horses are being pushed put into their place. They're kind of moved around the herd, and the horses do it to each other without ever touching each other, right? They're just there. They kind of communicate very, very effectively. If they perceive danger, they move together as a herd. They don't sort of say, "Excuse me, hang on, I think there's a bit of danger there," tapping each other on the shoulder, all those kind of things. They move in one moment through that. And we can learn a lot about that. I think a lot about ourselves by just kind of going into that way of communicating. We do that too.
Now, sorry to interrupt. You've mentioned, so horses, one of the great things about horses is that you're mentioning they don't speak and they tell the truth. Now, why horses and not other animals as well?
I mean, I've done this with elephants in Bangkok, and or just about 2 hours outside of Bangkok, and
Then
it was,
as well, curiously, in Botswana
yeah,
as well.
I think elephants can do it. I'm sure cows can do it. I'm sure any animal that sort of works in a social hierarchy. And I think specifically what horses bring to it is that they're flight animals. They're very, very similar to us. They're easily scared, right? And I think when people come to therapy, a lot of it is about the anxiety. That's sort of, people get anxious about themselves. They get anxious about, am I normal? Is there something wrong with me? Should I not be doing these kind of things? So it's very easy for us to kind of get quite anxious about ourselves. Same thing with horses. What are horses scared of? People kind of say, "Oh, my horse is scared of an umbrella. My horse is scared of a white plastic bag. My horse is scared of, whatever." That's not true. Horses are not scared of these items. Horses are scared of the unknown. They're scared of an umbrella because they don't know what the umbrella is, and it sticks out in such a way that it scares them. They don't know, is it going to attack them? Is it going to kill them? Or is it not going to kill them? That's why they kind of spook. We're the same. Our fear is about not knowing what's going to happen in the future, what's wrong with us. I think that's really what drives the anxiety. And of course, it's kind of related to whatever experiences we've had, whether there's trauma in our background, all these kind of things.
And tell me something like, for instance, I've seen a couple of, I'd love to know like a couple of examples. For instance, how do you deal with people with grief and ADHD, for example?
Okay.
Two different cases.
So loss is something that we've worked with a lot. Complex grief, we've worked with, and when I say complex grief, I think that's people who identify that that perhaps there's a loss in their past somehow. So I'm not talking about a normal, between quotes, process of grieving, which is up to 2 to 3 years if you lose someone who's gone. These are people who kind of deal with grief probably over a decade, and they feel they still can't sort of move on. How do we work? We work a lot with perspective taking. For example, we work in small groups. We get people to kind of look at what does the horse represent? Does the horse represent the bereaved person? What would you do with that? How would you kind of connect to that? So there's something in front of you. We use a lot of Gestalt ideas, for example, where as you have your experiments that you run, and you kind of saying, okay, so let's see if this horse represents the person that represents the loss for you in your life. Let's do something with that. Let's kind of let's sort of, what do you want to say to them? What is missing for you? Why do you find it difficult to kind of let go through this? And then you start processing the anger, the kind of the loneliness, the kind of the sadness, the kind of the different kind of processes. That's I'm thinking of one example with one of the last groups that we had, a woman, complex grief, February, quite a lot of mud, quite a lot of rain sort of going on, and she went to the horse to go and connect with it, and she slipped and she fell in probably the biggest puddle in the whole space, and she just started laughing. And this was the first time she laughed in probably a decade, because she just felt, what else can I do? This is my rock bottom. I'm here in horse shit. I am on my back. I'm in the mud. It's raining. It's cold. This is really my rock bottom. And, and then people started helping her up, and she went to the horse and she hugged the horse and she cried and cried and cried and cried. And something shifted, something moved on. And that's the kind of thing I think that you can't do very easily in an office.
It's beautiful when you see that. So I work a lot. One of my companies, actually, it's called Katrina, and we are dealing how to rethink death in society and the funeral industry. So we've been looking at grief from different perspectives. And I've worked a little bit with people with horse constellations as well, and I'm going into something that I'm really curious. I'm going to jump a little bit, but I think it comes a lot in relation of what we are speaking now. So you speak about Igala and Epona as two organizations that have very different approaches. You mentioned at a certain point, I've seen like very crazy things happening with the horses, where the people really relate to the horses. If it's someone that is about to pass away, or if it's someone that is dead, and people really believe that the person is represented in that horse. Actually, I think several people believe that the person is that horse, or the spirit is that horse. When you spoke about Epona, I had some notes here, because you said, I think Epona was like, that the note is something like, they are afraid of being considered crazy, and rightfully so. So what's the role of intuition? How does spirituality come into all this? Because there are very different approaches to the horse therapies, especially with grief.
Yeah, well, I actually had an interview with Linda Kohanov about 2 months ago, and I had a really, really nice chat with her. It was the first time I actually spoke to her and talked to her. And I think she's a very knowledgeable, very warm person. I think that what I was writing at the time was probably me quite arduously and quite strongly trying to bring a more robust sort of theoretical and evidence-based frame into something. And sometimes in order to do that, you need to push some things out of the way in order to really look at it. So, for example, when I started being interested in this field, this was maybe in the late 90s, early 2000s, which was at the time when natural horsemanship started coming up. We had the horse whisperers, we had the Monty Roberts, and very, very soon on the back of that, we sort of also had the kind of the first starting points of equine assisted psychotherapy, and it was the sort of Ipona type thing, and it was very West Coast America. It was very kind of California, Arizona, and to me, when I first encountered it and read it, it was just a bit too sort of woo-woo spiritual, and I didn't and I really couldn't get near that at all. Having said that, now when I look at it, I have a lot more time for it than I did then, and I think that's probably my sort of journey, because I think at that time I was just a rookie psychologist who wanted to bring some rigor to a field that, in my mind, was very anecdotal and very all over the place, and it had certain belief systems that were very difficult to kind of manage in some ways, or to grasp. So I think I was at that point much more interested in doing randomized controlled trials and looking at evidence-based sort of outcomes and all of that, and if we didn't get to that, then I was interested in doing case studies, so in-depth case studies, and following people over a longer period of time to kind of look how this all affected. But if someone starts saying, like you just said, the spirit of this person goes in the horse and then they become the horse, I don't really know what to do with that, right? I mean, I'm sort
No,
of like
I agree,
thinking, yeah,
because I'm blown away several times by it. Like I'm always
yeah.
like, sometimes things happen that I'm like, whoa, where did this come from?
And but if someone comes to therapy and starts talking about, they think their spirit is joined with this horse, I'm going to be very interested. I'm thinking, tell me about it. What does that, what is that like for you? Let me understand it. And I'm curious. I'm not going to say, you're having a psychotic episode. That's not really what I want to do. We undiagnose many more people than we actually diagnose, and it's sort of and to me, if the kind of if you believe that the spirit of a loved one is in this horse and that is very helpful for you, who am I to say that that's not true? I mean, I don't know. It could be, it could be true. It could not be true. I don't know. I'm agnostic to all of this. I suppose I was brought up a Jesuit, so I think I have that sort of agnosticism in my background in some ways that I want to kind of question. But it doesn't mean that I reject it. And I think look, Linda Koganov said some crazy stuff in these early kind of books and things about the kind of crossing over to the other side, and the kind of the horse ancestors, and I sort of
Yeah.
felt that you could explain all of this with different frameworks. You didn't have to go to spirituality to explain. Kind of biology probably was sufficient, or psychology was sufficient, or transference or countertransference were sufficient concepts to explain what was going on between that. So that's maybe where my sort of crazy, between quotes, sort of came in. Sorry, Linda.
But Andreas, I really, because it's very interesting. Like I'll tell you. So I teach at business school. My mom is a doctor. My dad is an engineer. So I was brought totally in the science part, and then I've been traveling all around the world and Mexico, and what I've learned actually was horse constellations, which is
Mhm.
based exactly on all the ancestors and everything. And the first time I go there, And I'm like, what's the trick? Because I've been around horses, and it's like, how can this person know all these things about me without, because I was also very skeptical and almost like testing out, like, let's see, because I've seen so much fraud in like so much spiritual stuff, that I was very curious. And after like the fifth or sixth session, I was like, I surrendered. I was like, I want to learn this. And I always have
Mhm.
a little bit imposter syndrome. I've given probably over 600 sessions now, and I always have a little bit imposter syndrome. And I really liked the approach of your book, exactly because of that. I think you bring the framework, you call things as they are, and without a lot of bullshit, which I find it's fantastic. Um, I have to tell you from my experience, and I've worked with both psychologists and non-psychologists on it with horses. And I think there's a part of intuition to it. And it happened to
Sure.
me. I remember a case of a person that I was with the horses and the person, and at a certain point, I just say, your dad had a mistress, right? And the person starts crying and goes like, David, nobody knows that. How do you know it? It's impossible. Like, it was me and my dad who knew it. And she starts crying. And I'm like, I have no idea how I know that. It just came to me,
Mm.
and I can't interpret like, if, oh, the horse moved the right ear of the, so that means the dad had a mistress. So like, these things are very, I don't know, I still don't, I'm not able to understand them as well. But also I think that a lot of what we call magic and spirituality are things that science hasn't reached yet or studied. And from that, I would follow on to, what's the scientific research? Because a lot of people question horse therapy as a little bit like woo woo, like you were saying, but I think there's not enough research on it as well. And I've been looking for it. Your book has great references, but I think we're at a very early stage, no?
Sure. I mean, let me pick up on the kind of the sort of spirituality and all of that. You know, I
Yeah,
run retreats on Nihi, and Nihi is in Sumba, and
yeah,
Sumba, I think the name of the island means the kind of the spirit of the horse. So, you know, the whole kind of the whole island is about spirits of horses, and we work very intuitively with a herd of horses, 27 horses that live in a semi-feral way on the beach there, and all of that. So there's something about that being there in that kind of space with those kind of, you know, the the sort of the villages around the hotel are, you know, animist villages. So everybody still kind of believes in kind of animism. That's the sort of the kind of the main. So there is some Christianity, there is some sort of Islam on the island, but the main thing still is very much about sort of animism. And it's really interesting to kind of spend time sort of around that and to understand these different ways of making sense of something and believing something. And I totally agree, and I think that's proper science as well. It's not because you know, science tries to kind of reject things, and if it can't reject it anymore, then it accepts it as truth. And I think, you know, people tend to forget that's how proper science works. That you're not trying to prove something exists. You're just actually trying to kind of say that I can't reject this now, so therefore I have to hold it
mhm,
as this is the case. Now, we know that with any kind of psychological research, even though we could use the techniques like randomized controlled trials, um, for example, we are still not, you know, we're not measuring the effect of caffeine on people's attention span, right? You know, we're still looking at how can an intervention, a relational intervention, help work. And the best piece of research that we managed to do was actually in the prisons. So, because in the prisons, we had a captive audience, if you excuse the pun,
yeah.
and it also that we could have control groups, and you know, we would have a control group of people who would participate in some group therapy inside the prison. Then we'd have a control group of people who didn't, and then we have a control group of people who kind of came to us and did the equine assisted psychotherapy. Now, I also have to kind of add that the the program was more than just psychotherapy. We would also we would do mindfulness with them. We can kind of do psychological education with them. We do lots of processing groups, and of course, there's also kind of the equine work as well. Now, what we showed was hugely significant results in how the people who kind of were in our equine group were, statistically massively significant to the others in terms of self-esteem going up, self-efficacy going up, people feeling much better equipped with the outside world. Their locus of control kind of shifted a lot more to an internal locus of control, meaning that they felt they had a lot more agency to operate in the world, that they weren't just blaming society and everybody else around that. So we had some very, very nice psychosocial kind of outcomes from that, and sort of social cognitive outcomes as well. But the best one, I think, is still to this day, because we are still kind of following that cohort, is that none of them reoffended, right? And that's been going on
Wow,
for about
that's
7 or 8 years.
I for
And
you to sorry, I love for you to. I think we have a little delay here, but I would love for you to tell about what's the reoffending statistics, because people, I think, they are often not aware that most people that go to jail, they reoffend. So that's very impressive, the result.
yeah, and I think what happened was that, I mean, I don't have the data on how reoffending works, but the group of prisoners that we were working with were what was called revolving door prisoners. They would
Yeah.
kind of, they wouldn't have huge long sentences, but they would kind of continuously come back into prison. And for us to be able to have that group, that is, again, what science does is science goes, it's not by chance that this is happening. We can only kind of call this, it's not by chance that you kind of start seeing this. And those are the kind of things that we had. Now, do we have very clear understanding of why this happened or what has not happened? I think, it's still, as you said, early days to kind of form all of this. But I think there is something about the fact that horses signify something very, very powerful. And one of the most, I think, important things that I feel like I can say about equine assisted psychotherapy is that when we connect with a horse, we don't just connect with an animal, we also reconnect with a disavowed part of ourselves. And I think this is really where I think the power lies. We kind of reconnect and we become a little bit more fully us. We kind of, perhaps we can kind of connect with a bit that we didn't want to look at, or we can reconnect with a bit that actually was very positive about ourselves. And one of the big things that we found in the prisons was hope. People started reconnecting with hope and feeling that, so memories would come back where they would talk about having their granddad take them to see a horse, and the smell of the horse's breath reminded them of being a little girl who could kind of sit on the back of a horse. And they, in this pretty gloomy and dark space of a prison, all of a sudden people started reconnecting that actually their life wasn't just black and white. Their life did actually have some really positive aspects into it. And if you don't have that as a psychologist or a psychotherapist, to kind of being able to kind of anchor something in those positive sort of elements, then you can't work. There has to be, you have to find the light in the darkness in order to kind of
And
to sort of facilitate growth.
and I'd love to know a little bit more about you now, because the
Okay.
work you've been doing, it's fantastic. First, like, thank you for bringing all these techniques and all these tools to more people, but also, like, I think pushing the field forward. Um, I was very impressed by all the different type of work you do, from young people, bullying, prisoners. You do like grief leadership that we'll talk about, which is a topic that I'm very interested as well. How did you come across it? And what's your mission? What drives you every day? Because it's like going into prisons with horses. It's like you have a lot more profitable and easier venues. It's like you have to have a passion for it. You just don't do it because it's like it's easy. So, how did you come across horses as a tool? Because you have like a very formal education on psychology as well. And what drives you?
Okay. I mean, first of all, I have to kind of say, like, probably like everybody, I have a blind spot to, like, what my own motivation is in some ways, and around that. And as you were talking, I was actually thinking to myself, thinking, yeah, why do I make things so difficult? You're absolutely right. And it's like, even with, running the retreats in Sumba, it was this. I mean, Sumba is a very difficult place to get to from Europe and from America.
Yeah,
It's difficult to get to from.
I was trying to join you, but it's just the way there was like insane.
It's a very difficult place. Like, I'm sort of thinking, why do I kind of set this up in one of the most difficult places? In the same way that why do I do this in a prison? As you say, I could probably do far more lucrative and easier kind of thing. So I mean, I sort of have to think about that one. But other than that, how did I kind of bring this? I tried for a very long time to keep horses and psychology and psychotherapy separate in my mind, until it became very, very obvious that there was something much more there. I'm a lifelong horseman. I've been around horses all my life. There is, I know what horses represent to me, and
You
I
still
know.
ride?
Yes, yeah. I rode about 4 hours today. So riding is definitely for me my sort of, that's how I detox. I just kind of take a horse out and just ride. And I'm very lucky to be in Richmond Park in London, which is probably the best sort of riding that you can have in any kind of capital city. So yeah, I sort of, I've always known that relationship with the horse was special. I suppose autobiographically, I think my parents divorced when I was about 12, and I think at that point, I would not talk to anybody much, and I would spend all my time with horses and with my horse at the time, and actually with another horse that I was very, very close to and very fond of. And there was something about that kind of that connection. And I suppose at the time I would have called it being understood in some kind of way. Now I'd probably kind of too careful to kind of using words like being understood by a horse, and I probably wouldn't kind of put it in those kind of terms. But then I sort of felt very much there was stable has multiple meanings, doesn't it? It kind of it can be a place where you put a horse, but it also means stability and feeling that there's some sort of structure in there. And I think for me that definitely was both. I liked spending time in that space, and even around that age I wasn't actually doing a huge amount of riding at all. I just wanted to be with the horses, and just felt sort of connected. And I think as we get older, we probably tend to lose that connection. I think children and young people have far more the ability to kind of connect with an outside world around them. They're much more attuned to what's happening in the world around them. A little bit like when you sort of you go into a meeting, for example, and you kind of walk into the meeting and you kind of think, gosh, there's a bit of an atmosphere here. What just happened? We don't know how we know that, but we do know that something shifted, something's happened. If you come home, I don't know, you go and visit your parents, at the way they say hello to you or not say hello, or whatever happens around it, you kind of think, oh, maybe there's something not quite right here, there's something off. And we share that, and I think that's what I would call intuition in a way. For me, that's really, it's a kind of, if I had to put another word to it, I'd probably put the word energy onto it. And I also do that grudgingly, because I think energy is such a flaky word, and I don't really
Totally.
want to use it. But I don't have another way of sort of expressing it. So connection, I think in my book and in general, I talk about how we connect. How do we connect in a non-verbal way with the world around us? And then once we kind of look at our connections around that, we can kind of look at how we are interconnected. And through sort of studying and the various trainings I did and the various academic sort of things I did, I got more and more cerebral, I think. I sort of, in my head, as people tend to get, far more cognitive, you're far more analytical, and the horses kind of kept being there, but they weren't really to the fore. And I think, late 90s, early 2000s, the time when I was kind of looking at it, everything I saw, I just I couldn't really see myself doing this, because I thought, no, I know there's something here. And then I met this incredible woman called Star Lee, and she was working with ex-Navy SEALs in Jacksonville, just north of Miami. And she was,
Beautiful place.
and they had seen a lot, of action in theaters of war in Afghanistan and Iraq at the time, and they were deeply, deeply traumatized. They kind of PTSD, the most severe PTSD that I had ever kind of experienced at that time. And these guys, because they were mainly male, they were all male. I think the ones I kind of saw would rock up at her ranch and park out, and they would go out and sort of be with these horses. Sometimes they would not send a single word to any of the people around, except for when they walked out, and they'd go, "That was amazing, thank you very much." And I think, and at that point, I started seeing what actually was going on, and that's how I developed my model at the time. Starlee was totally working from an intuitive basis. She was just very, very intuitively, very patiently providing in the best humanistic sort of Rogerian person-centered way. She was holding a frame and really accepting, and these horses were part of that. And it was amazing, the work that she did. So I thought, I want to spend my time trying to figure out how this works. And excuse me. And that's, I think, why I did all these different things, where I kind of thought, okay, I want to research, I want to understand how this works with kids on the spectrum. I want to understand how this works in prisons. I want to understand how this operates in schools. I also, I see things in systems a lot of the time. I want to understand, it's like if someone comes in with a diagnosis of anorexia, for example, or any of the eating disorders, I don't see that person as, having the eating disorder. I see that person as expressing something with their body in a context, in a family, and we need to understand this as a family and as a group, and with multiple professionals around it. And I think that interconnectivity is really important to me, and we have amazing results with that, with that approach and horses.
And how much does it work for you as well? Do you use them for you as well? Because you go through all these experience. Do you think, because one of the things I've noticed is like how much I learn as well when I go and give sessions. It's how much I learn about myself. I remember when I was studying, that my teacher told me, "Look, actually, we take so long because teaching you the technique is not that hard. The hard part is for you to get to know yourself, so you can actually be less biased and be more centered on it." And
Sure.
I'm always like impressed on how much I learn about myself when I give sessions as well. How does it work for you? Do you use it on a regular basis, consciously, or you separate yourself from it?
Well, I don't separate myself from it. Of course, I don't separate myself from it. I did, early on in my training, I did 10 and a half years of Freudian psychoanalysis 3 times a week on the couch. So that was a very, very lengthy, thorough process, I think, to kind of, it was never supposed to be that long. It was always supposed to be 5 or 6 years sort of thing. It just ended up taking a lot longer, and just kind of being, it was all of a sudden 10 and a half years before I think we sort of really knew it. So I think I have spent a lot of time trying to and working on understanding sort of myself. Do I learn something in every session I do? No. I think I work incredibly hard in the sessions to facilitate things. And I kind of learn about myself in it? Maybe, maybe not. What I do learn a lot about in all the sessions is about horses, because horses. I'm not going to say horses are surprise me every day, but they surprise me at least once a week, where I sort of thought, "Wow, I've never seen you do that." And that's an extraordinary connection to make. Or there's a sort of a last week a horse would someone who's quite scared of horses didn't want to go near them, and just went and put its head right on this person's chest. And I'm thinking, gosh, I've never seen you do that. You've never done that. It's sort of there's definitely you're connecting there in some ways, and it was a really quite moving moment. But I don't interpret it. It's like it does something for me at that time. Like I could kind of I reframe my understanding of this particular horse, for example. And of course, I want to see how the other person kind of responds to it. How does my patient respond to that? And that's entirely up to them. If they, for them, this could be not a moving thing at all. But that's also data for me, right? If I find something moving and they don't find it moving, then that's also data.
And now tell me a little bit more like how your sessions work, because you said you work incredibly hard during your sessions. You go into a session. What's your process there? Because, for instance, when you mention Igalas, which is a much more like see how the behavior change and everything. First, do you always use horses, or can you do it with any horse? And then, like, there are a lot of things to pay attention to. Um, how do you know how to pay attention, what to pay attention to, and you take notes so that you can follow through to different sessions?
Yeah. So we always start with an assessment session. So, and typically the work we do is quite short term. So we kind of have an assessment, typically followed by 6 treatment sessions. And what I've really sort of, what I work to is the model I've developed over the years, and basically kind of saying there are these components that we can very usefully sort of look at. And the first one we always look at is safety, because you are working with flight animals that kind of weigh over 750 kg, and there are sort of real dangers involved potentially. All horses can kick, all horses can bite. But what it really allows you to do, it allows you to help people position themselves in the world. It helps you to kind of get them to understand of how do they actually keep themselves safe. So the safety briefing becomes something far, far more important. It becomes a self-care sort of analysis almost.
Andreas, uh, just because on your book you actually mentioned that safety. Um, Maybe I'm misreading it, but I actually liked how you wrote it there, in the sense you're
Okay.
coming into a place with horses or a field with horses or wherever you're doing the session, and people can't control the animals. Like you say, my team can't be responsible for it, so people are responsible for their
Yeah,
safety as well. Did
they're
you change
accountable.
your mind since then? Because you're telling me that your book was from 2015, and one thing I've been
Yeah.
appreciating in the conversation is how you've been evolving your ideas. But it's actually a worry that many people have. Then there's liability when you're dealing with clients and so on. Have you changed your approach to safety?
Not at all. Not at all. In I think it's very, very important to make people very accountable. and experience that, because a lot of us now have forgotten what that's actually. There's always someone else to blame, or there's always someone else to be responsible around something, and we position that from the very beginning very, very clearly, is that this is a dangerous thing to do potentially, and I cannot keep you safe in all of this. You have to do that by yourself. And that's to do with my horses, but of course it's also to do with, psychologically, can I keep everybody safe? Now, of course, if that results in a huge amount of anxiety that we can't do any work, we need to kind of look at that, right? We need to kind of look at, because people need to get some kind of reassurance. So we kind of have to maybe look at, working behind a barrier, or working outside of the stable, or we kind of just looking at, because I say horses don't care whether you're in a field with them or you're just on the other field standing on the other side of the fence. They don't care. It's like, you're still going to get the connection, you're still going to be there, and all of that. So it's more systematic. I mean, we've had people coming to see us, and one person I'm thinking of in particular hadn't left their house for 2.5 years. So they didn't just automatically just come. They would kind of come to park the car, and we would take a horse to the car, and we'd talk through the window. And probably did that for about 3 sessions. We had a kind of, the session came in the car park with the horse next to the car, until that person was ready to kind of make that move outside, and all of that. But that's how we work. We work with, whatever you bring, your pace will kind of help it. But all horses do, and there's another thing I think that we kind of, that's why we've always, as humans, relied on horses. Horses speed things up. They make things go faster. That's why we're interested in horses. We can go from A to B running ourselves, or we can take horses and go to A to B really, really faster. And that's exactly the same thing they do in therapy, because there's no flannel around it. What you see is what you get. And the only thing you have to kind of get people to do is kind of saying, look in the mirror. Can you see? And if people are willing to look in the mirror, they can do that very, very quickly and learn a huge amount about them. Horses don't judge. Horses don't care, really. They don't care what you've done, or, what they care is that you are what you are. Horses don't like people who are very anxious but pretend to be really, really, strong or cool kids or whatever, because it confuses them. They don't understand what that's like. They're kind of, but if you're anxious, fine. If you're angry, fine. They know how to cope with that. They don't judge it in the same way that they don't judge a horse in the field. That's, a dominant horse pushes a more subordinate horse in the herd off the food. People look at it, go, oh, look, he's bullying that horse. He's not bullying that horse. It's just, that's how they operate. That horse doesn't sit there then thinking, I'm going to get you back. I'm going to plot your downfall. I'm going to, gang up, get all the other horses to gang up on you and all the rest of it. No, horse accepts that's okay. That's just what happens now. That's what we're doing. They're not kind of saying, asshole or this or the other. They just accept that's what's happening.
I love I love the approach, and sorry, because I thought it was such a smart comment on the frameworks that you had on the book. Because I always tell my students, it's like when you have models, they are just to give you structure and the base, but it's not one size fits all. And I love the example, like the person didn't leave the house for 2.5 years. They go to the car, they park the car, and you take the horse there. So there's like no framework around that. But it's like exactly like each situation is a situation, and you adapt to it. So I think that's a great example that I keep telling my students. It's like you can't take the frameworks and just apply them at face value. Use what you can from it, but go from there. So Andreas, you mentioned also, I think there are a lot of confusions on the different types of therapies that people can do with horses. You also speak about the difference between psychotherapy and coaching. Especially coaching, I think, is a term that has been thrown all over the place in the last few years, that everyone is a coach now. Can you please make the differentiation between them. I really like the way you talk about it on the book, and I would love to know how your work, how would you classify your work, if you can classify it, if it's a mix between the two, if it's a third option, how do you see it?
Well, I mean, it depends what I'm asked to do. I think is would be the kind of, because I am a psychologist. I'm a therapist. I had two different trainings in psychotherapy, so that's the kind of the big main paradigm I use to make sense of the world and how people behave in it, and all of this. And I started coaching um, in the sort of late 90s, I would say, when coaching really wasn't a thing yet. There wasn't really um, a lot going on with that. And the first coaching job I had was for a chief executive of a large US based conglomerate who had a new CEO taking over EMEA, and who needed a coach. And I was introduced to them, and I started working with them. But I had no idea what coaching was at that time. I was just seeing it as a kind of psychological approach to understanding yourself, and of course I knew a lot about that. So I started, and I think I actually discovered quite quickly what the difference was. And The difference was that, and then I started, obviously coaching a couple of very senior people, and they all left, and they all stopped being corporate, and sort of, some bought a farm, others set up a small business that they wanted to run, and all of this. And of course, because of course the company pays me, they didn't pay me to do this. They were quite concerned because it's costing them a lot of money having to kind of bring these people in. And I suppose it was at that point that I then realized that this was probably not what people had in mind, because I was really dealing with them as a therapist, and I was kind of looking at them, kind of, what do you want to do with your life? Do you understand why you're doing this? It's a bit like, you asking me earlier, why do you pick all the difficult things? Why don't you kind of go for the low hanging fruit on stuff? So, and then I started realizing there's another task here in the coaching, which is that there's an organizational party in this as well. And then I started really rethinking, and then became, I think, a lot different in the way I started working with people, which is basically saying, okay, my role as a coach is to ensure that that person doesn't derail, that people who are at the very, very top in an organization are not normal, in the sense that they're more than two standard deviations removed from the mean, right? They are quite extraordinary people in many ways. So you can't deal with them. They're kind of, their flaw makes them phenomenal. The kind of the flaws that they have, whatever those flaws are, drives them and makes, and it could be a deep insecurity that they're not even aware of, or it could be some, whatever it is, they're kind of, and I suppose the job of a coach is really to kind of get those people to continue to work and to perform at that kind of level without really damaging themselves. And that's how I saw the coaching working, and to make sure that the kind of so therefore the third leg of the stool, as it were, the organization also gets what they want. So you're there as a sort of more of as a hygiene factor, really, to kind of making sure that you kind of, so that was sort of developmentally how I learned about what's the difference between psychotherapy and coaching. And I still
But
today kind
you
of think that that's probably it.
but you mentioned that there's psychotherapy is more towards the past, and coaching more towards the future. One of them, and coaching can be a little bit more directive, I would say, like more action based. Would you agree with that?
To a certain extent, I mean, it's because I understand people from these many different things. It doesn't mean that I necessarily need to kind of decide to work from it. So, for example, I may get a sense that there's probably some unresolved issues with someone in past relationships or whatever it was. And I would use that to inform how I work, but I wouldn't actually take the person there to start working through them and to start work and processing them. So, I would kind of clock it, I would be aware of it, but I wouldn't necessarily work with it, because I also feel that I probably I have not contracted with that person to actually do that kind of depth work right now. That person is wanting to do something on a certain outcome. Now, does that mean that I'm more directive? Not necessarily. I still have this very, very strong sense that what we're doing really is we're in a sort of helping profession, right? We're in a whether we're a psychologist or a coach or a psychotherapist, we're all kind of in this kind of helping profession. What I think is none of our business is change. Change has nothing to do with us whatsoever. Change is solely the patient or the client's business. We can kind of help them understand something of themselves and of a situation differently, but it's not up to us to tell them what to do, how to do it, or even if they want to kind of do it. So, and that goes to say someone with OCD who kind of washes their hands 20 times in bleach every day so they can kind of feel safe and all of that. You have to admit sometimes that's maybe the best that person can do, and you will not get them beyond that. And trying to kind of shift or change or whatever makes you not very effective as a professional in that, because you're really pushing at the wrong thing. What you can do is with everybody is to kind of use the time and the space that you have to help people understand a little bit more about themselves, because I firmly believe that it's the greater understanding of self that will actually allow other decisions to be made, if that's what they choose to do. But it's none of my business.
Okay, so you don't, for instance, you wouldn't get like help people structure like an action plan. That's the person's
No.
responsibility after, okay, to control. And
Yeah.
when you're working with companies, you work in the same way, like the leadership programs you do, and it's the same thing. You help them understand, but you don't help them get like to the conclusions or to where they should go. Because one of the things
No.
there's a really there's a sentence, actually I've learned it on with some shamans here, on some ceremonies I've done in the past. And there's a great sentence that I like, which is, the ceremony starts when the ritual ends. And I use it a lot for the horses as well, which is, well, you can come here, see how great you are inside and all the potential you have and figure out all your issues. But if once the therapy ends, you don't act on it, it's not useless, but the impact is not going to be that great. So how do you recommend, or how should people, is there a homework? How should people follow through, or you're done with the session and that's it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I fundamentally believe that the real work is done outside of the session, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. That's where the real work is. The kind of the session is the session, but the real work starts between the sessions, and the real work really is right at the end of the therapy, which is one of the reasons I think that I don't really want to kind of get involved with that. That is none of my business. I can only really kind of if I start suggesting to people what might be the best thing for them to do, I can only really extrapolate from what I think the best thing to do is, or what some evidence might show the best thing to do it, but that may not work for them. That may not suit them. Or even if it is the best thing, they may not ever be able to kind of pull it off in that kind of way. They have to choose for themselves, and they have to kind of accept something or change something. And those are the two big things. So the only thing I think I can hand people as the kind of the takeaway from my sessions is curiosity. Can I see can I get people to see that being curious about yourself and other people and the world is actually something that is the gift that keeps on giving? But closing it down and thinking that you've understood something, I think that's really where you kind of start, closing knowledge down too much. So keeping that open, I think is really, really important. Keep people curious.
And what makes a good therapist, in your opinion?
Well, someone who's curious for sure, who is interested in things. I mean, I can tell you what doesn't make a good therapist. I mean, someone who wants to help other people is not a good therapist. That's a person who needs a lot of therapy. You don't. If you want to help, if you want to rescue, you need to understand what drives you to kind of help and rescue, because you're going to be doing it for you rather than for the people you're working with. So I think someone who goes in there with a very, very open mind. And also who has other things to do. I think this is partly why I'm my whole life, and nobody who works in my team solely does this kind of work. They all have other interests as well, and I think that's really important. You can't just do this as the only thing that you do, because you're going to burn out. You have to do other things. You have to lecture. You have to teach. You have to, do you know be an artist, do whatever it is that you kind of want to do, but you cannot just do this. And knowing that and knowing how to look after yourself, I think is also really, really important.
The Renaissance man,
For
360
sure.
approach to humanity. And what makes
For
a good
sure.
patient?
Um, okay. Someone who, I think openness, I'm going to say openness to kind of, someone who is also willing to go with you into a place, kind of someone who kind of might say, like, for example, I don't mind working with people who are very skeptical. In fact, I love working with people who are very skeptical, because they're usually the first ones to kind of think, oh my God, I never thought this was going to be possible, right? So you kind of, the people who are very skeptical, particularly of working with the horses, love it, because you're kind of thinking, yeah, we're going to have some really, really quick early wins with this, because I am confident in the process, right? I know what happens when you put people and horses together. Stuff happens, and people get surprised, and it gives you an opportunity, because what do you do? You're kind of, it's like a microcosm of something, isn't it? Kind of, even if people kind of say, well, that horse is really,
Yeah.
that horse walks away from me, and clearly it's already bored and stuff like that, and kind of thinking, okay, yeah, tell me a little bit more about how you see the world in a way, kind of, is that something happens a lot to you, and is that, in what basis does that belief have? Why did you not think that the horse maybe was inviting you to go along with wherever they were going? What are the other hypotheses around it? Then people can go, oh, I hadn't really thought about that. So maybe I have got this pattern that I tend to kind of put myself down, that I don't find myself very interesting, that I think other people are much funnier and wittier than I am, and think, okay, and now we're working. Do you know, I can get to these sort of things within 10 or 15 minutes on the first session and assessment. This stuff could take years to come out in a consulting room, for people to be able to be, have enough courage to actually say that to the person sitting in front of them. But here, they've just spoken it because a horse just did to them what their worst nightmare was. Being rejected, being left behind, being abandoned, and there you have it. Bang, it's out. And I'm thinking, it wasn't that bad, was it? Yeah, just kind of, so what? Maybe it's a grumpy horse.
Yeah.
Maybe, didn't like your aftershave.
And would love to go a little bit more in detail now about Operation Centaur. Like, if you could tell us a little bit more. That's the organization. I believe it was founded in 2005, and it's the organization
Correct.
you use to develop your work. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, the team? And I'd love to know how you spend your time because from being in the UK, in Bangkok, in Indonesia, it's like how do you organize your life with all these activities as well?
Yeah, so yes, I founded it officially. I mean, as I said, I had already been researching and doing some work much earlier than that. But 2005 was really the kind of the foundation time with it, and I started working mainly with some of the sort of mental health hospitals, psychiatric institutions that were quite local to us, and working with some people there who were very open minded, some psychiatrists who were very open minded to kind of, and that sort of, we developed a lot from that. So in the beginning, of course, it was just me who was doing it with an assistant I had, and then quickly I thought, okay, well, this is, there are only certain things that I can do. Like, for example, I'm not a child psychotherapist or child psychologist, so I thought, that's not what I want to do. It's not because it's horses that, it's like for everybody. So I started looking for different members who can do that. So I have got specialists who do child psychotherapy, and so I've always been going. I'd rather have the person who has the skill set already. I can teach them the horse piece. I teach people how to do equine assisted psychotherapy, so they can kind of work with me. They can come alongside with me. So now we have a team of six sort of clinical psychologists and psychotherapists who do amazing work, and they all sort of specialize in their own sort of field, from addiction through to eating disorder, through to working with children and young adults, and then the general kind of depression, personality disorders, all of that. So I still run my own clinics as well, because I always fundamentally believe that you can't really remove yourself from that. But I do spend more of my time now trying to kind of develop different aspects of the work, like the retreats, for example, was a logical next step for us to look at, because it's working with horses is such an extraordinary methodology, that I just thought there's no retreat structure around that. So when, like, Nihi and I got together, it was just like, yeah, this just made so much sense for both of us to kind of start doing that. And then the outcomes from that have been extraordinary. It's easy for someone to kind of say, oh, this changed my life, but we have every single person who's gone
Yes.
through the retreat very honestly says, this has changed my life. I never thought that I was going to get this much out of it. So it's a very
Where are you
nice.
doing? You're doing the retreats in Nihi. You have one now in November 2023. How often do you do it there, and where else in the world do you do it?
So Nihi, we tend to go back twice per year. So we've been there. This is the third one, third trip to Nihi. At the moment, we're looking at the Middle East, so looking into Abu Dhabi, which is on the cards for 2024, and Italy. We've got a very exciting place that I can't really tell you about just yet, but a very exciting place with some incredible horses. Amazing. So I think the criteria that we're looking for is we want to find horses that are kept in a natural environment, that sort of that can function as a herd. Horses need to be happy in a herd, so that's really one of the things that we kind of look at first and foremost. And then we also kind of look at how are these horses treated, how are they, are they just an afterthought for this hotel or this resort, or are they actually very core part of how things are done here? And so one of the things I learned, probably to kind of answer your question in the beginning, what makes me tick and all of that, what did I learn from all of that, is the kind of to do things a little bit quieter. So had I been doing this 15 years ago, I would have already probably set up, 10 retreats a year, doing them all over the place, and then rushing and then complaining that I was jet lagged and I had to do yet another. I think the retreats are very, very much for me, actually, in the sense that I really enjoy doing them because I I can, I'm involved in the selection process. When people apply to come, I already get to know them at that point. I can advise whether this is a useful retreat for them to go on or whether this is not perhaps suited for them at this stage in their life. And I can build these kind of relationships, and I can design the sort of the guest list almost. I can design the people that we're putting together to come to these amazing places and to do this kind of learning with us. And it just makes me feel pretty good about it. I'm thinking, yeah, it's nice to be able to do this kind of work and to spend time with horses in some of the most awesome places in the world.
Oh, fantastic! And when it comes to corporate work, usually,
Yeah.
actually, a question before that: how many horses do you usually work with? And it's a one-on-one basis, one client with a horse. Do you have more group activities? Because you speak a lot about herds, and you were just mentioning that you want herds, that the horses are happy in the herd, and so on. A lot of the therapies are done in more like restricted environments, let's put it like that. How do you usually work? Do you work with the herd in itself? Do you work with like a smaller number of horses, one on one, more a group dynamic? How does it work?
I think it's a variety. I mean, I have 32 horses in London, so some of them live in a natural herd. Others are a herd, but they're not always together. And it depends on the kind of work that we do. Sometimes we get people to choose a horse, which I think can be very, very, very powerful thing to do. Like again in Nihi, for example, one of the first things we do is we hike up one of the hillsides, so we overlook the beach, and then the horses kind of run up from the beach onto the hillside. So people have this overview of this herd of horses running on the beach, and they start identifying with, who do you identify with? The ones in the front, the one in the middle, the one with the limp at the back, the one that sort of keeps kicking the others. Who are you in this? Which one of these horses kind of speaks to you? Which one do you want to know better? And then we give them the opportunity to just kind of go and meet them, and just kind of go, pick one. Just pick one that you want to kind of work with, and then you work with those horses on a one-to-one basis. And you know, with a family, for example, if we do family work, there's typically two therapists that work with the family, and multiple horses as well, unless we want to model, for example, what is it like to be the odd one out. So we have one horse, and the horse is the odd one out, and who identifies with being the odd one out in this family, for example. There's lots and lots of different ways of working. um, Corporates, I like working with bigger groups of horses as well, because there's a lot more about sort of, how can you kind of get everybody to work together. For example, it's easier to kind of get one horse to work with you. If you have to bring a herd of horses together, you also have to deal with the dynamic within that herd, not just with the dynamics of the people that bring them. So there's many, many different ways that I work with. Or one to one. And we do non-verbal work as well. It's like, sometimes we work with people, the only thing they really want to start to do with the work is to just feel their belly pushing against the big belly of the horse, and feeling the warmth and feeling the breathing and finding the heartbeat, and just connecting with this big other thing outside yourself, which can be very cathartic for people.
And I could stay here for hours. So I think we'll definitely have to do like a next episode. Um, where do you see the field going, and where would you like it to go from here? And a little bit understanding what are your future plans. You have the retreats that you mentioned, but what excites you about your work now and about what's coming?
So I think the big thing that's coming now is that equine assisted psychotherapy is here to stay.
Mhm.
I think it's a lot of it is now, people know it, people ask for it, people will go and sort of say, do you think equine might work for me? They go to their psychiatrist refer them to us. That didn't happen 5 years ago.
Yeah,
People didn't
that
know
I've
that.
been seeing.
uh,
I have like waiting lists and people writing me from all over the world. Like, can I do a session? It's like, I don't have the time right now. Like, it's just like, but before it would be like, what's this thing? Oh, this is just like some crazy idea or some crazy therapy. But now, actually, even a lot of CEOs are actually reaching out to me because of my work, both in with horses and in business schools. A lot of people are reaching that before they would just think I was crazy.
yeah. So we're now in a position that we don't have to justify our existence. So I think that's sort of number
Yeah.
one. And I think, therefore, I think my sort of probably next step is to kind of look at how can I, because I've been a professor for the last 20 something years. I have the skills to design courses, qualifications, all those kind of things. So I think probably the next thing would be to kind of bring equine assisted psychotherapy more firmly to a postgraduate footing, because if you look at all the other trainings are all at master's or doctoral level in the trainings. So I think, why not, 50 years ago, when art therapy first started becoming a thing, maybe 60, 70 years ago, there were no qualifications for it at all. And it lasted probably a couple of decades before the qualifications would come. And, the qualifications that are now around are not really qualifications. They're just, membership organizations that kind of train you a bit in their model, and then they kind of move on with it. I mean, it's like, we train people as well, because there's no, people want to know what it's like, and we kind of think, okay, well, come and do some training with us and find out. But they're not the proper qualifications. The people who come and call themselves psychotherapists, it's because they're already psychotherapists, it's because they're already clinical psychologists, so they just upskill in the kind of continuing professional development sort of thing. What I really, I think, want to be able to do is, if someone kind of grows up and says, I want to become an equine assisted psychotherapist, I think in the next 5 years, we should be able to kind of say, this is the pathway to do that. You do your undergraduate degree here, you do your master's degree here, and if you want to do a doctorate, you can do a doctorate here. And it can all be specifically just looking at how horses work within the mental health provision, etc. So I think that's probably where I want to go to next.
And do you think it's exclusive a psychotherapy area?
No, but I think that's where I can make the contribution the most. I think there's opportunities for coaching, of course,
Mhm.
as well. But I think if we look at the roots of coaching lie in psychotherapy and in psychology,
Yeah.
and I think at the moment we need to I think we need to work it from that basis. We have to kind of, I think we need to go to the most solid base that we have in order to understand what we're actually building on. And I think that still is um, psychotherapy and psychology.
Okay. Even for coaching, because a lot of the coaching we are seeing nowadays are not is not actually it's based on but doesn't require the formal education on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that will be the next wave for sure. I think that'll be the next wave. Um, I think that, would I see, if I wasn't a psychologist or a psychotherapist, could I do the same work as I'm doing? No, I can't, because there are certain things that I bring, and I'm not saying that that's a better or a
Yeah, yeah.
worse way. It's just that I would not be able to kind of do that. So if I look at where can I make a contribution, I can only really make a contribution of where my knowledge base is, where my skill sets lies, and then work from there. And then there's other people who can be fellow travelers pick up pieces of this project and do their own thing with it and all of that. And I think that's the sort of, I think one of the ways I think I'm probably different now than I was 25 years ago. 25 years ago, I was very much more sort of about, my ego probably and wanting to do this, myself and all of that. And I think I'm now much more collaborative. I just want to work with people and sort of because realize that we're all working on the same path to very, very similar kind of goals. And particularly in something that involves horses, we're all kind of united, I suppose, by the fact that we think these are incredible creatures to spend your time with.
Yeah. Andreas, I'm fascinated by your work. Want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for this interview, and I would love to actually be part of one of your projects in the future and meet you in person. Thank you so much, and thank you for pushing the field forward.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Lead Sex Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please support us by giving us 5 stars and following us. You can continue the conversation on comments on our LinkedIn page under Leeds Adventures. See you next week.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Lead Sex Podcast is only possible thanks to our amazing team. Fran Santenheld, Alexander Ritter, Mariana Ribeiro Brazão, Julia Billick, Linus Lamar Lunds, and Nathalie Tyson. A special thanks to the team at Riverside and Jonathan Keeson.